The assessment? I'm sure we're all just thrilled to pay $5,000 for a fence we didn't even vote on, Brenda. I didn't look up at her. I kept digging through the junk drawer in the laundry room, moving dead pens and rusted paper clips to find one AAA battery for the smoke detector. It had been chirping every 10 minutes for 3 days. Brenda, the HOA president, stood in my doorway in a crisp, white linen outfit. She looked like someone who had never sweated a day in her life. "It's for the community aesthetic, Tiffany," Brenda said. The board decided the mahogany stain was peeling. I found the battery under a stack of old takeout menus. I pushed past her to get back to my laundry and gave her a tight, closed-mouth smile. I've spent 10 years in this neighborhood. Everyone's lawn is a competition, and everyone's mortgage is a secret. Of course, the aesthetic, I muttered. Once Brenda left, I leaned against the dryer and checked the joint account on my phone. We were already stretched thin, and $5,000 for a fence felt like a joke. While I scrolled through the transactions, I saw a charge from EZ Pass. The amount wasn't huge, but the timestamp was wrong. Tuesday afternoon, 2:14 p.m. The toll bridge crossing took Timothy completely out of the city and toward the coast. Timothy had a quarterly review meeting with his regional director at 2:14 p.m. on Tuesday. I stared at the screen while the dryer hummed. I told myself it was a system lag or a quick errand, but that bridge didn't lead anywhere he ever went. When Timothy walked through the door that evening, he looked exhausted. He dropped his briefcase and rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't look at me as he went straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. "Hey," I said, leaning against the counter. I saw the EZ Pass account. "Why were you crossing the bridge on Tuesday afternoon?" Timothy stopped with the glass halfway to his mouth. He stared at the faucet for a few seconds, then set the glass down. "Look," he started. He sounded breathless. "I'm a little surprised you're monitoring the toll logs, Tiffany." "I was checking the balance for the HOA fee," I replied. "It's just a question." He turned around. He didn't get angry or deny it. Instead, he tilted his head and looked at me with pity. "I think you're just stressed," he said softly. "You're creating this narrative of distrust because you're overwhelmed with the house. We should talk about why you feel the need to police my movements instead of dealing with your own insecurity." I stood there. He didn't answer the question. He just picked apart my personality. For a second, I wondered if I was being paranoid. Maybe the $5,000 was just getting to me. Maybe I really was the difficult one. "I'm not policing you," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. "I asked about a toll. And the way you're asking it feels controlling," he replied. He kept his voice calm. "Maybe we can talk when you've calmed down." He walked away. I spent the next hour scrolling through his phone while he showered. I found a deleted text thread and managed to recover a few fragments. My heart hammered against my ribs, but as I read, my shoulders dropped. It was just a series of boring, fragmented conversations with a contractor about a deck repair that never happened. No names, no hearts, no secret meetings. Just nothing. The next few days followed the same pattern. Every time I mentioned something that didn't add up, like the $2,000 missing from the savings account. He told me my communication style was toxic. He said he loved me, but he couldn't talk to me while I was spiraling. Then we had the family dinner. I hosted Timothy's parents, my sister. I set the table with the good linens and spent 3 hours on a roast, worrying it would be too dry. Halfway through the meal, the doorbell rang. It was Sarah, Timothy's work wife. She wasn't invited, but she walked in with a homemade chicken casserole and a wide smile. "I know you've been feeling under the weather, Tiffany," Sarah chirped. She pushed her way into the dining room. "I thought you could use some real nourishment." I hadn't told Sarah I was sick. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 weeks. Timothy stood up to take the dish. For a split second, he and Sarah exchanged a look. It wasn't a professional look. It was a quick, sharp glance of shared knowledge. "Thanks, Sarah. That was so thoughtful," Timothy said. He looked back at me, and the pity returned. "See?" he whispered, loud enough for the table to hear. "This is what I mean. Sarah is just trying to be kind, and you're already getting tense." I looked at the kids who were chewing their dinner in silence. I didn't want to start a fight in front of them, but I also didn't want them to think this was how a marriage worked. I just sat there, staring at the casserole, wondering how Sarah knew I was sick when I hadn't told a soul. Staring at the casserole, I wondered how Sarah knew I was sick. I hadn't told a soul. Across the table, Maya picked at her roast, her eyes darting between Timothy and me. Timothy avoided my gaze. He rearranged the serving spoons with slow, precise movements. "Timothy," I said, my voice thin. "How did Sarah know I was under the weather?" Timothy stopped moving the spoons. Without turning around, he let out a long, heavy sigh. When he finally looked at me, he tilted his chin and narrowed his eyes. He started softly. "We're in the middle of a family dinner. Do we really need to do this right now?" "It's a simple question," I replied. "I haven't spoken to her in 3 weeks. How does she know?" Leaning back in his chair, Timothy remained silent. He tilted his head, studying me with a wide, blinking gaze. "I think you're overthinking this," he said. "Maybe you mentioned it in a group text and forgot. Or maybe it's just obvious because you've been so tense. I'm worried you're focusing on these tiny details to avoid the real issue, which is how you're reacting right now." My jaw tightened. While Maya watched, I pushed a piece of carrot around my plate with a fork. "I didn't tell her," I whispered. "And that's the pattern, isn't it?" Timothy replied, sounding exhausted. "You've created this narrative where everyone is conspiring against you. It's not healthy, Tiff. I want to be supportive. But I can't engage with this kind of distrust. It's toxic for the kids." Everyone at the table stopped talking. My sister cleared her throat and stared at her water glass. Timothy's parents looked at their plates. I hunched my shoulders, sinking into the upholstery of my own dining room chair. For the rest of the meal, I only nodded when people spoke. After the guests left and the kids went upstairs, I felt the sudden quiet of the house. Standing in the kitchen, I scrubbed the roasting pan with a white-knuckled grip. Timothy stayed in the living room, his voice low on the phone. Whenever I walked past the doorway, he hushed his tone. Before heading to bed, I grabbed his phone while he was in the bathroom. Scrolling through his messages, I searched for Sarah's name. I found a deleted text thread from her. For 10 minutes, I dug through the recently deleted folder, but found only fragmented messages about a project deadline and a lunch spot. The next morning, I opened my laptop at the kitchen island. An email from the swim league waited. The league required Maya's competitive registration by Friday. Another $800 for the season, plus gear. Adding that to the $5,000 HOA special assessment for the community fence repairs. The total exceeded our monthly income. Opening the joint savings account, I saw the $2,000 from last week was still missing. I scrolled through the transaction history. No transfers made sense. Instead, I saw a series of small withdrawals from ATMs in areas Timothy never visited. While Timothy showered, I snatched his iPad from the charger. My hands shook. Ignoring the contractor messages, I checked the browser history and saved passwords. I found a login for a secondary account. It was a digital wallet app. Clicking into it, I saw a list of payments. Most were small, but several large sums, hundreds of dollars, went to a name I didn't recognize, L. Vance Collections. I stared at the screen. "What are you doing?" I jumped, nearly dropping the iPad. Timothy stood in the doorway with a towel wrapped around his waist and damp hair. He didn't shout. He just watched me with lowered lids. "I was checking the swim fees." I lied, my voice cracking. I thought the iPad might have the login for the league. Timothy walked toward me, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. He stopped close enough for me to smell the soap. "You're snooping again," he said, his voice dripping with disappointment. "We talked about this. This lack of trust is a symptom of your anxiety. I can't keep having these conversations where you treat me like a criminal because you're feeling insecure about the budget." "There's money missing, Timothy," I said, looking up at him. $2,000. And I saw a payment to a collection agency. He paused, rubbing his jaw. "I was going to tell you," he mumbled. "It's just a professional matter. Some old debt from my first job. I didn't want to stress you out. I was handling it. I was protecting you." "Protecting me by lying?" I asked. "I'm not lying, I'm managing the situation," he replied. Stepping back, he adopted a calm, clinical tone. "The fact that you've turned a mistake into a reason to police me just proves we need to look at your communication style. You're spiraling. Tiffany, you're making a mountain out of a molehill because it's easier than dealing with your own instability." He turned and walked back into the bathroom, closing the door with a soft click. At the island, I watched the iPad screen glow. Returning to the swim league email, I saw the $800 fee. I checked the joint account one last time and saw the balance drop another $400 since yesterday. I closed the laptop and pressed my forehead against the cool granite of the counter. I sat in the silence, listening to the shower run while the unpaid registration form remained on the screen. The shower clicked off. I didn't move, just leaned against the counter with my forehead pressed to the granite. The cold stone felt like the only thing keeping me steady. From the hallway, I heard the curtain slide back, and the heavy thud of Timothy's footsteps. He walked into the kitchen smelling of eucalyptus soap and damp skin. "You're still staring at that screen," he said. He didn't look at me. He went straight to the coffee maker and started filling the reservoir. "We can't just keep looping on this, Tiffany. It's not productive." I pulled my head back and looked at him. He wore a gray robe, his hair sticking up in damp clumps. He looked exactly like the man I'd married 15 years ago, back when he actually brought me tea when I had a migraine. "The account balance dropped another $400, Timothy," I said. My voice sounded flat. "Maya's registration is due Friday. That's $800. And we still have that $5,000 HOA special assessment for the community repairs we never even voted on. We don't have the money." Timothy sighed, a long theatrical sound that suggested I was the one being unreasonable. He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. "I'm handling the L. Vance situation," he mumbled. "It's a process. I can't just snap my fingers and make a decade-old professional debt vanish. I'm trying to negotiate a settlement that doesn't bankrupt us." "By taking money from our daughter's swim league?" He tilted his head, giving me that same clinical look of pity. "The way you're framing this is unfair," he replied. "I'm managing a crisis in secret so you don't have to carry the burden. And the second I hit a snag, you turn it into a character flaw. Honestly, the instability you're showing right now is exactly why I couldn't tell you sooner. You don't handle stress with any kind of grace." I didn't argue. Every time I tried to pin him down with a fact, he turned the conversation into a critique of my personality. I just stepped aside and let him pour his coffee. I thought about Sarah, my work wife, who had stopped by yesterday with a chicken casserole because she noticed I looked piqued. She'd patted my hand in that way that makes you want to scream, and for a second, her pity made me wonder if I actually was the unstable one. 10 minutes later, the mail clattered through the slot in the front door. Timothy stayed in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone, probably checking in with Sarah or whatever professional matter required his attention. At 8 a.m., I walked to the entryway and gathered the stack. It was the usual glossy flyer for a new gym in San Ramon, a water bill, and a thick, cream-colored envelope. The envelope lacked a return address. It just had a handwritten name, Timothy Ramos Woods. Certified mail in red. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew that if I did, he would use it as more evidence of my toxic need to police him. But I tore the perforated edge anyway. I found a legal notice from a firm called Vance & Associates. It wasn't a bill. It was a notice of asset identification. I skimmed the legal jargon and landed on a list. It listed a small residential property in a coastal town, the same direction the Easy Pass had taken him on Tuesday. The document stated that the firm had located the undisclosed asset and was moving to place a lien on the property to satisfy an outstanding debt of $140,000. I stopped breathing. $140,000. He told me it was a small professional debt. Below the property listing, the paper mentioned a representative, Agent Linda Vance. I thought back to those deleted texts I'd spent hours trying to recover in part 1. I'd found fragments about a meeting and a final agreement, but they'd contained nothing useful. I had assumed he was seeing someone. I'd spent nights imagining a mistress, someone he was sneaking off to visit across the bridge. I'd felt the hot, sick jealousy of a woman who thought he was replacing her. The mistress wasn't a lover. She was a debt collector. He hadn't been sneaking off for romance. He had been sneaking off to beg a woman named Linda Vance not to seize the hidden assets he'd kept from me for years. The kitchen suddenly felt miles away. I didn't feel a surge of anger or a need to scream. Empty. The mystery vanished, replaced by a very concrete, very expensive disaster. I heard Timothy walk toward the hallway. "Did the mail come?" he asked. His voice sounded casual, but I could hear the tension, the way he was bracing himself. I didn't answer. I folded the paper back into the envelope and set it on the entryway table, exactly where it had been. I walked back into the kitchen and sat down at the island. I said, "Just bills." He walked past me, glanced at the table, and snatched up the cream envelope. He didn't open it. He just shoved it into the pocket of his robe and looked at me. "You look pale, Tiff," he said softly. "Maybe you should lie down. I think your anxiety is really peaking today. I can handle the swim registration on Friday. Just stop worrying about it." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He had won. He thought he'd convinced me that I was the broken one in the house. As soon as he left the room to get dressed, I didn't go to the bedroom. I grabbed my phone and opened our joint bank app. I didn't look at the balance. I went straight to the account settings and changed my password. Then, I spent the next 20 minutes taking photos of every single transaction from the last 6 months. Every ATM withdrawal, every payment to Elvance, every weird charge. I uploaded the photos to a private Google Drive account. Timothy didn't know existed. My hands stayed steady. I wasn't spiraling anymore. I was documenting. While the photos uploaded, I looked at the swim league email again. The $800. The $5,000 for the HOA. The $140,000 in hidden debt. The numbers blurred into one giant, insurmountable wall. I heard Maya coming down the stairs, her swim bag slung over her shoulder. "Mom, did you pay the fee yet?" she asked. "Coach said if I'm not on the list by Friday, I can't start the heat." I looked at my daughter, then at the door where Timothy had disappeared. I didn't want to tell her that her father was a liar, but I couldn't tell her the money was gone either. "I'm working on it, honey," I said. I opened a new tab on the laptop and searched for divorce attorneys specializing in hidden assets Bay Area. I didn't bookmark the page. I just left it open, the white screen glowing in the quiet kitchen, and waited for the sound of the garage door to open. I heard the garage door rumble open, and the vibration hit the kitchen floor. I didn't close the laptop. I didn't even move my hand from the mouse. Timothy walked in, still wearing his blazer, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than whatever we had left in our checking account. He stopped 3 feet from the island. He looked at the screen, then looked at me. He didn't ask what I was doing. He just took a slow breath and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We're really doing this?" he asked. "The second you feel a bit of stress, you go nuclear. It's just how you handle things. Tiffany, we could actually talk about the Elvance thing if you weren't so intent on blowing up the family." I looked at him. I didn't feel that usual spike of panic. I didn't feel the need to defend myself or explain why $140,000 in hidden debt counts as a bit of stress. I just blinked. "You still haven't paid the swim registration," I said. Timothy shifted his weight and looked toward the living room. "I told you I'm handling it. I just need a few days to move some things around." "Right." I stood up and walked past him to the fridge. I didn't touch him. I didn't look at him. I grabbed a bottle of water and left the room. For the next 3 days, I turned the house into a vacuum. I stopped leaving the sticky notes on the coffee maker. I stopped sighing loudly when he left the cabinets open. I stopped asking where he was going. It was a cold, functional kind of peace, and Timothy hated it. He kept trying to bait me into a fight, using that soft, measured voice to tell me my withdrawal showed I was unstable. He wanted me to scream so he could tell the kids I was having another episode. I just gave him one-word answers and kept my Google Drive folder synced. I spent an hour digging through his old phone, which I'd managed to get a hold of. I found a deleted text thread from a number I didn't recognize. I spent way too much time restoring those messages, thinking I'd find the smoking gun. When they finally loaded, it was just a series of fragmented texts about a plumbing leak in a rental and some arguments about a security deposit. Absolutely nothing useful. Just a waste of my Tuesday. Then, on Thursday, I saw a notification pop up on my phone. It was an email from Brenda, the HOA president. The $5,000 special assessment for the mahogany fence staining was officially overdue. Brenda's tone was that specific kind of polite. That feels like a slap in the face. She reminded us that community cohesion relies on the timely contributions of all residents, and hinted that a public lien would be the next step. Living in a Bay Area suburb where every lawn is a manicured lie is exhausting. Everyone drives a Tesla and pretends they aren't one bad quarter away from losing the house. I could almost see Brenda imagining the gossip. The Wilsons, the perfect couple, failing to pay for a fence. It's the kind of social death that happens in slow motion. My phone buzzed again. A text from Sarah. Thinking of you. Hope you're feeling better. Do you want me to bring over another casserole this weekend? I have a great recipe for stuffed shells. I stared at the screens. Sarah was the woman who knew I was sick before I'd even admitted it to myself. She'd been Timothy's professional confidante while he drained our savings. She'd come over with soup and tea, acting so concerned, while probably knowing exactly where the money was going. No thanks. We're all set. I didn't tell her I knew about Linda Vance. I didn't tell her about the coastal property. I just blocked her number. The real stress, though, was the kids. I spent the afternoon wondering how to handle this without poisoning them against their father. I didn't want to tell Maya that her dad had gambled away their stability. But I also couldn't keep pretending we were just going through a rough patch. It turned the whole emotional disaster into a practical problem. How do I move a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old without them realizing their life just shrunk by 2 bedrooms? Friday morning, I met with a lawyer via Zoom in the guest bedroom. The news didn't feel like a victory. The coastal property Timothy hid didn't offer a golden parachute. It acted like a lead weight. Between the mortgage he'd taken out in secret and the $140,000 lien from Vance and Associates, there was zero equity. He hadn't been building a secret nest egg. He'd been juggling a series of failing investments and debts that were finally catching up to him. He didn't just lie about the money, the lawyer told me. Her voice was flat. He effectively tied your credit to a sinking ship. I sat there in the quiet room, looking at the beige wallpaper. I felt a strange sense of relief. The mistress wasn't a person. She was just a mountain of bad math. That evening, Timothy was in a great mood. He spent an hour in the living room, shouting at the TV and texting his friends. It was the night of his fantasy football draft, the one event he refused to miss. He'd been talking about it for weeks, acting as if everything in our marriage was fine because I had stopped fighting him. I'll be back by 11, he said, kissing my cheek. I didn't flinch, but I didn't lean in. Do you think you can handle dinner for the kids? Maybe try to be a bit more present with them? They can feel the tension, Tiff. I've got it, I said. As soon as his car cleared the driveway, I moved. I had already rented a small storage unit under my maiden name. I didn't take everything. Just the things that were mine, the things he couldn't claim, and the documents I'd spent the last week gathering. I packed the suitcases with a methodical speed. I didn't leave a long, heart-wrenching letter. He would only use a letter as evidence that I was spiraling. I loaded the car in the dark. The streetlights of our neighborhood cast long, orange shadows across the pavement. Maya was staying at her grandmother's for the weekend. I'd told her it was a special treat, a sleepover with her cousins. I hadn't told her about the swim fees yet, but I'd already transferred the $800 from my separate personal account, the one Timothy didn't know about, to the league. I walked back into the house one last time. The air felt thinner. I went to the kitchen island and set my house keys down. Beside them, I placed a single piece of paper. It wasn't a note. It was a printed copy of the Notice of Asset Identification from Linda Vance, with the total debt of $140,000 highlighted in yellow. I didn't look back as I walked out the front door. Currently, I'm staying in a short-term rental 2 towns over. The divorce process is dragging, because Timothy is trying to argue that I'm mentally unfit to manage the assets, but the bank logs and the Google Drive folder are doing most of the talking. The bank is foreclosing on the coastal property. I'm still dealing with the HOA, and Brenda still sends me passive-aggressive emails about the fence. But I just delete them. I don't owe the neighborhood a perfect lawn anymore. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for sharing your journey with us. It takes an incredible amount of courage to step away from a life that looked perfect on the outside, but was crumbling behind the scenes. My heart goes out to her for everything she endured. The way Timothy weaponized her own mental health against her while draining their future is truly devastating. Dealing with the fallout involving Paul and Timothy is a burden no one should have to carry, especially while trying to protect her children. Tiffany's decision to stop fighting and start documenting was a masterclass in taking your power back. Instead of giving him the emotional reaction he wanted to use against her, she gave him the cold, hard truth in a highlighted envelope and walked away. But now, I want to hear from all of you. So, do you think Tiffany made the right choice by leaving without a final confrontation? Or do you think she should have forced Timothy to look her in the eyes when the truth finally came out? She just lifted her chin and said, "Please leave your advice for Tiffany in the comments below." If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a confession. We'll see you in the next video.